Good afternoon, Chicago. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons, and this is Reset. It's time to catch up on what's been happening lately across Chicago and Illinois in our weekly news recap, where we take you behind the headlines with local journalists working on stories like these.
Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson is throwing strong support behind a plan for a new publicly owned Bears stadium south of Soldier Field.
With more than 70,000 seats beneath a fixed, translucent roof.
We are excited to invest in the greatest city in the world.
The Bears would pay more than $2 billion, but are asking for about that same amount in federal, state, and local funding.
Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker and other elected officials say they're skeptical about the Chicago Bears' plans for a new lakefront stadium.
Lots to dive into, and I cannot do it alone. So here to help is Christian Farr, reporter for NBC5 Chicago. Nice to see you again, Christian.
Thank you.
Also with us is Chicago Tribune political writer Dan Petrella. Hey, Dan.
Glad to be back.
And we've got Mitch Armentrout, government and politics reporter for the Chicago Sun-Times. Good to have you back, Mitch.
Happy Friday. Thanks for having me.
The Bears have made their play for a new lakefront stadium, as we heard. The $4.7 billion plan calls for a domed stadium on the museum campus. Now, before we get into all the financing details, and there are a lot, what does this dream stadium look like, Dan?
It looks like a very modern stadium, the kind you've seen recently built like in Las Vegas for the Raiders, Allegiant Stadium, and very different from sort of the historic colonnades of the original Soldier Field. As we heard in the intro, it's a translucent glass dome near the lakefront. There's supposed to be like giant windows where people can kind of look in from the outside. It would be built over what's now the south parking lot south of Soldier Field. And then there's this whole grand scheme for what would happen to the existing stadium and all the parkland around that. And the idea of bringing more green space to the lakefront is the big picture idea that was pitched on Wednesday by the Bears and the mayor.
Yeah. Well, you were at Wednesday's big reveal, Mitch. Were you dazzled?
It was hard not to get caught up in some of these really flashy images, people hanging out on big park spaces and things.
Yeah.
And, it looks very idyllic, but it's kind of hard to parse out exactly what exactly the city would see and when, because, there's obviously a lot of phases to this project. It's not only this $3 billion stadium. They want to do a bunch of other upgrades to roads and parks around there. And the way it was laid out, a lot of those, nicer sides of their renderings of those, beautiful parklands and things. That's not going to be the first thing that would be built as part of this. The number one thing for the Bears is obviously getting a big new stadium. And, the rest for them, I mean, obviously they want to see it all happen, but, that's their number one focus.
Dan, let's get to what the Bears are stressing would be a public-private partnership. This is complicated, but I want you to just walk us through how the Bears propose paying for this.
It is quite complicated, and not all the answers are clear yet, despite promises of transparency and that all questions would be answered with Wednesday's announcement. It's sort of a multi-party, multi-phase thing. Like you said, the Bears are bringing to the table, with the help of a loan from the NFL, about $2.3 billion. They want the Illinois Sports Finance Authority to, first of all, refinance existing debt that the state still owes for projects at Guaranteed Rate Field and at Soldier Field, and at the same time borrow close to $1 billion of additional money to help build the stadium. They're hoping it would be paid off over 40 years, which is a long time to be repaying bonds. Yeah. And they say that that can be done with the existing 2% hotel tax that is tacked on to hotel stays in the city that currently is paying for those previous Guaranteed Rate and Soldier Field projects.
Now, Christian, since the Bears franchise is worth $6 billion, I'm curious if you're hearing people ask, why can't they just build it themselves?
Do they really want to spend all their own money and when they can utilize the
could.
city? But, when I think about this, I think about Kevin Warren, who came from Minnesota, and one of my good friends actually works for the Minnesota Vikings, and I've been to their stadium. It's an absolutely amazing dome stadium, and, the future of this stadium is really to host a Super Bowl one day in Chicago. That's really what this team wants. It's what this city wants. And so, it's interesting to see how this all plays out in the next, 10, 15 years, what this looks like now that you've got, a big-time franchise quarterback.
Glad you mentioned Kevin Warren, Bears president. Let's hear what he had to say.
We need more cranes in the sky here. And that's why I want us to get beyond picking on what's wrong with this project instead of saying what's right with it.
More cranes in the sky. The Bears say this will create 43,000 construction jobs. I mean, is that a compelling argument, Christian?
I mean, yeah, it is. I mean, and if you go to Minnesota and see what he did there, it's absolutely amazing. I mean, you see this downtown stadium. It's domed. It's beautiful inside. You go over to the practice field, big hotel, big entertainment complex for fans to be over there and enjoy it, right over near a man-made lake. It's beautiful, and I think he wants to take that and bring that here to Chicago. I think that's one of the reasons why the Bears picked him, because of what he did in Minnesota.
Say more on that, Mitch. I mean, how persuasive was Kevin Warren?
You know, I think for the audience in the room that day, I think it was very persuasive for city officials, aldermen, who will really reap some of those political benefits of, bringing in jobs and things. I think with any sort of development, whether it's a casino or a stadium or anything, the developers are going to come in with really rosy projections on jobs and, all the spurring of economic growth and all these beautiful buzzwords. And I think there's no doubt that, there's going to be union leadership in the city who will love to see those tens of thousands of jobs. I can't really vouch for the research behind that exact number, and it would be hard for anyone to. And that's kind of what developers are known for doing, playing with those numbers and kind of dangling those out there to really try and get momentum behind a project. I think those are the real outstanding questions, is to see if he can get support in Springfield to really see those numbers.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was going to say. Is the problem is, as convincing as the presentation might have been to the people in the room, the people that really need to be convinced were not in the room and are not convinced so far. You heard a lot of skepticism coming from Governor J.B. Pritzker about it, House Speaker Emanuel Chris Welsh, Senate President Don Harmon, and these are the folks who are going to control whether the changes in state law that would need to take place for the Bears plan to go forward actually happen. And it's been a very, very cool to somewhat negative reception so far from the people who control the levers of power in Springfield. So I don't know what the Bears are going to do, what Brandon Johnson is going to do to try and change that. It's not like the mayor has had great success so far in pushing an agenda in Springfield. So seeing how he tries to work those relationships is going to be really interesting.
Yeah, glad you went there. Mayor Johnson was in the building. I want to play a little bit of what he had to say. Later, we'll hear from some of those skeptics you mentioned.
An investment like this requires real skin in the game from ownership, which they've done that, a commitment to public use, which they've done that, as well as, an overall commitment to, building a better, stronger, safer Chicago.
Talk more about that. Did he express concerns with the plan?
No, it was.
Or was he fully on board here?
Yeah, the mayor's. It was a pretty full-throated endorsement of the plan. Even going so far as trying to portray it as a component or a complement to the progressive agenda that he put forth in his campaign for mayor, which a lot of people I think are very skeptical of how providing public benefits to a private corporation owned by, as you said, people who are worth billions of dollars fits into the agenda of a mayor who wants to address things like inadequate school funding and homelessness and the ongoing migrant crisis, and has also other things he's going to be going to Springfield and asking for in the last, less than a month now before the legislature is supposed to be done for the spring.
Yeah.
I think it raised a lot of eyebrows to see the mayor there on the stage with the team and really, being sort of a cheerleader for this plan.
Sun-Times architecture critic Lee Bay called Johnson cheerleader in chief. How tough is it going to be, Mitch, for this progressive mayor to make a case for billions in government funding for a stadium?
I think he's going to keep on hammering the details that he did on Wednesday, in terms of, one of his main mantras is investing in people. And, you can argue that you're going to do that when you create allegedly 43,000 jobs, and you're going to invest in people in the sense of creating more park space for them to enjoy. 20% more than there currently is the claim from the Bears and the mayor's office. But I struggle to recall another politician really putting himself out there quite this much for a project that is so tenuous politically.
Is he writing a ticket as a one-term mayor?
And his favorite joke to make now these days is that he's going to be a 6-term mayor. He's going to be in office for 23 more years, and it's just really a fascinating gamble for him to make.
Yeah, he just got city council approval, as we know, for to spend that $70 million on migrant services. That seems more in line to me with his progressive agenda than trying to give billions to a stadium or to sports teams.
Yeah, and he's trying to cast this as something that's not going to cost the city taxpayers anything really. No new taxes on the city of Chicago, which sort of called to mind the famous George H.W. Bush, read my lips, no new taxes moment.
Yes.
And we just haven't seen full projections from the team on how this is all going to work and whether the 2% hotel tax that exists is actually going to be enough to pay for this. And also, as Mitch mentioned, the 20% more green space on the lakefront is all contingent on not just the initial, I think it's $325 million in infrastructure projects with no identified funding source that the team says they need to open the stadium, but an additional $500 million to $1.1 billion in infrastructure money also coming from ostensibly the state or the federal government, we're not sure, to tear down most of the existing Soldier Field, which would be one phase of the project as I understand it. And then another phase of the project would be to restore the historic colonnades to be part of this beautiful park space that we saw the renderings of. So there are a lot of questions and a lot of phases to the plan, a lot of moving pieces that all need to line up perfectly for the pretty pictures that we saw on Wednesday to become reality.
And there is like a scenario where the Bears build this new stadium and they can't secure that infrastructure money, and now we've got a vacant Soldier Field sitting there next to this $3 billion behemoth.
And if you ask about his progressive agenda, you're talking about $1 billion of additional, whatever 1.5 minus 3 million, 1.2 billion, whatever, of additional infrastructure money that they want for the full picture project. If the state's going to put that toward a stadium park project, that's money that can't go toward things like homeless shelters or fixing up CPS schools that need repairs or other infrastructure needs that the city might have, streets and alleys and sidewalks and all sorts of stuff that the money could be spent on that it's not being spent on.
This is Reset. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons, and we are going behind the headlines in the weekly news recap with the Chicago Tribune's Dan Petrella, NBC5's Christian Farr, and Mitch Armentrout of the Chicago Sun-Times. So, as you mentioned earlier, some folks are not on board. That packed house Wednesday did not include Governor J.B. Pritzker, who says he was not invited. That didn't stop him from sharing his thoughts, though. Let's listen.
Look, I'm a Bears fan. I want to be clear, and I want them to win, and I want them to have a great place to play. But I just think that the taxpayers' dollars need to be protected.
How big of a hurdle is that to overcome, Christian, if the governor's not on your side?
Oh, I think it's a huge hurdle. I mean, I think, just looking at this from the outside, I think, Brandon Johnson doesn't want to be known as the mayor that lost the Chicago Bears to another city, town.
Oh, that would be so big.
Arlington Heights, the Giants in New York, they play in New Jersey.
Right.
So who wants to be known as that, and how much does that kind of work into this? Plus, Brandon Johnson, this whole migrant issue has kind of rested on his shoulders. He inherited it, and people don't like the way he's handling it. There was a lot of upset people on the west side with him, and what does that mean when he comes up for re-election? What does that mean? And so if you have the Bears, what happens to them if they don't get this stadium? That's the other thing that you got to consider in all of this.
Right. Let's hear what Illinois House Speaker Chris Welch had to say.
I'm going to say to you publicly what I said to Kevin Warren privately last week. If we were to put this issue on the board for a vote right now, it would fail, and it would fail miserably. There's no environment for something like this today.
So he was pretty clear, and Senate President Don Harmon said he is skeptical as well. Yet Kevin Warren wants the legislature to vote right away and not wait until that November veto session. What do you think is going to happen in Springfield, Dan?
I would say the odds of anything happening before May 24th, which is the date on the calendar that the legislature is supposedly going to adjourn for the spring, although they have a tendency to kind of work in extended time sometimes, but
highly unlikely.
Highly unlikely, I think, that they'll take a vote on any of this before. And as far as I know, the Bears have not even identified a sponsor who would carry legislation for them in the legislature to try to get this done. there's, as you heard in both those clips, a lot of skepticism from the people who would control whether things move or not. I think Welch did go on to say that environments can change and you never know what's going to happen, but the Bears have a lot of work to do to convince people in Springfield that this is a good idea. And, I think that even some of the state lawmakers who were there at the announcement on Wednesday, I think of State Representative Cam Buckner, who is the representative that represents the area that represents Soldier Field, said, there's things he likes about the plan, but he still also has questions. So it doesn't seem like there's a groundswell of support among lawmakers to get this done, especially given the fact that many of them, everyone in the House and about a third of the Senate are up for election in November as well.
That's true too.
This didn't get a ringing sort of endorsement, I think, generally publicly. So I think it'd be a tough vote for them to take in an election.
Yeah,
year.
it's not just them, though, who aren't drinking the Kool-Aid here. The lakefront protection group, Friends of the Parks, they were quick to release their statement. It reads, quote, "We are told that a new domed stadium on protected lakefront land will make Chicago a great city. We are already a great city, in large part due to our protected lakefront," end quote. Friends of the Parks accuse the Bears of trying to rush through the plan. I mean, is the Bears' play here, Christian, just to move this through as fast as possible before anybody has any time to debate it?
Well, I would think so because, look, we've been doing tons of stories about Arlington Heights for the longest period of time. And then I think I went to Aurora and did a story because Aurora's mayor wanted to bring the Bear. It's this constant narrative that keeps, and then finally we come back to the lakefront.
Yeah.
And,
wasn't there somebody in Indiana that wanted to?
I think there was
bring the Bears there too.
Probably Gary wanted to bring them. Heck if I know. But when I think of Friends of the Park, I go back to the George Lucas Museum, which everybody got really, really excited about, and then that got halted, primarily because of Friends of the Park when they brought up all of these concerns. So it's this is not going to be something that you can get done in a month. I mean, it's just not.
Yeah. How, Mitch, are the other Chicago sports teams who want new stadiums reacting to all of this? Like, I'm thinking about the White Sox and Chicago Red Stars women's soccer team.
Right. Jerry Reinsdorf, the White Sox owner, he went down to Springfield in February, kind of making a pitch for basically the same pool of money that the Bears are going to be after.
Yeah.
And received a similarly lukewarm response from lawmakers. We've reported that the Sox are, potentially going to be making more of a public presentation on throwing more private dollars into it to try and garner more public support. But it's the same. They're just running into the same stonewall at this point that the Bears are. And Governor Pritzker himself yesterday kind of called out the billionaire owners for, leaving women's sports teams out of the conversation. The Red Stars, who are lobbying to get a stadium of their own out of this whole conversation. I think when it comes to the Bears, it's just, and like you mentioned with Friends of the Parks, it's just become such an expensive ordeal all across the board that could end up in the courts.
Absolutely.
And it's interesting. I mean, the fact that what seems to have, maybe it's just Kevin Warren coming to town and changing perspective, but they still own this $200 million piece of property in Arlington Heights where the team could build its own stadium, own everything, control all the revenue streams, and they haven't really made the compelling case for why they shouldn't just go ahead and do that and why taxpayers should help them build this stadium on the lakefront.
Now it is time to tackle the other exciting Bears news, Christian. They got the first pick in the NFL draft. How'd that go last night?
I think it went pretty well.
Yeah.
Don't you think?
First pick.
Best kept secret, right?
Sounds like good news.
Yeah, Caleb Williams, an amazing quarterback, and they say this is a franchise-changing decision. It's the dawn of a new era, something that hasn't happened with the Bears since the 1940s, from what I understand.
Oh, wow.
And then on top of that, with your number 9 pick, getting a wide receiver as well, and then using those veterans who are on the team, it seems that, this is maybe what they're trying to use to really sort of push that stadium discussion. Here, we finally have made the right decisions with the right players. We moved Justin Fields along because he just wasn't the quarterback that could lead the team. He may be a second guy. Caleb Williams is the guy that can lead. I mean, if you watched the draft that night, he didn't say, he was going to bring a Super Bowl to Chicago. He said he wanted to come here and meet all the players, learn their names, learn about their families, and really sort of build a family with this team. And it seemed that Rome, the wide receiver, as well, wants to do right now. But of course, we have to see what happens on the field. I think back to Johnny Manziel when he goes to the Cleveland Browns, and everybody was saying this is, an era-changing quarterback, and then that just kind of fizzled. So, I'm not saying that this is anywhere near that, but, you have to wait and see what happens on the field and see if they can win those games.
Do you think, any of you, really, I'm opening this up to the floor, is it a coincidence that the team revealed their stadium plans the day before getting the top quarterback, or is this quite strategic?
I scratched my head as soon as I saw that email come through. I'm like, they're going to have a press conference right before the draft about the stadium? No, I don't think it's a coincidence. I think it's all together. Again, if you follow Kevin Warren and you followed his story, this is kind of how he does things. He has a roadmap.
So that quarterback hype translates into more support for a stadium project. Is that the idea here?
I think among fans that you can there's certainly a target demographic there for that message. Obviously this is a football hungry town, very passionate fans, myself included. And yeah, when you're making some real big swings at the draft with some pretty generational talent, that might make some of these public dollar asks might make that pill go down a little bit smoother.
Yeah, and it's interesting, too. It also just lined up that it was exactly 1 month before the legislative session was supposed to end. So just like some synergy there.
That
but I
too.
think it's, you do wonder if they kind of deflated some of the joy of this really, really exciting draft pick for all of us long-suffering Bears fans by the day before putting this plan out there that, has gotten such a mixed reaction from fans, from folks in the city, from politicians. I'm not sure that it was quite exactly the 1-2 punch that they were hoping for.
Yeah. Well, let's go back to our mentions earlier of Arlington Heights, right? So we're clear. Do you all believe that northwest suburb is truly old news for the Bears?
I think Arlington Heights is very much still in the picture for all the reasons that Dan said. I mean, a publicly owned stadium doesn't really solve any of the problems that the Bears had going into this discussion, that they want to own their own stadium and reap all the benefits that comes with that. And I think the other end of it is that, obviously this pitch has kind of it's stumbled out of the gate, to say the least, with state lawmakers. And I think there's an even bigger challenge ahead from Friends of the Parks that's going to tie the team up in court, could potentially tie this up in court for years. Mm-hmm. That's going to cause tens of millions of dollars, which, compared to the property tax dispute that they're having with the school districts out around Arlington Heights, where we're talking about a difference of between $10 or $11 million a year in property taxes versus $3 million a year. It seems like, to me, I'm no business expert, that seems like a bargain at this point versus, just kind of being tried in the court of public opinion in Chicago for so long. And,
you're
all
getting
those legal
nods
bills
around the table, so I think
yeah.
we all agree.
Who in Illinois doesn't feel like their property tax bill is too high?
Yeah,
yeah. And I think, from the governor's perspective, he's the governor of the entire state of Illinois, and as much as, he has said he likes seeing the Bears on the lakefront, to him, there's no threat of the Bears leaving the state. There's no real credible offer from Gary or Muncie or Hammond or any place in Indiana to steal them or for them to go north of or go to St. Louis or something like that where they're missing a team. So I think from the perspective of the governor's office, like it doesn't really matter whether they stay in Chicago or go to Arlington Heights as long as it's a good deal for state taxpayers.
Yeah. Well, catch us up on the former governor, Pat Quinn, because he has stepped into this stadium conversation. What does he want to see happen?
Yes, he wants to see an advisory referendum on the ballot to find out whether voters in Chicago think that public funds should be spent on a stadium for a private team. This is sort of the thing that Pat Quinn has been known for a long time is these referendum pushes, and it's not surprising to see him doing this sort of thing. It's sort of become a hobby of his after leaving the governor's office.
Let's hear his own words.
Give us a chance to vote at the ballot box on whether or not this proposed stadium for the Bears, this billion-dollar boondoggle, should be allowed to happen.
So what are the chances that this referendum could become a reality?
It's possible, and I think the big question is whether, it really has any impact if it does get on the ballot. I'm not sure how warm the reception has been in city council for getting it on the ballot. But it would be, maybe a helpful barometer, to show where public opinion is. Obviously not, a ballot measure isn't necessarily a scientific poll, but at least some indication of where the public is on this idea.
Mm-hmm. Well, before we close out the Bears portion of the recap, I wanted to get your thoughts on Missouri voters. They rejected a plan to use public money for Kansas City Chiefs and Royals stadium upgrades. Anybody think that was alarming for the Bears?
The Bears are nowhere near as good a team as Kansas City, obviously. Just state the obvious.
Yes.
And I think that does not bode well for
Yes.
the temperature being taken in Springfield.
Yeah, I mean, the difference is they were asking for a tax increase, but also they had Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce on
Right.
TV in commercials pitching this, and they couldn't get the support that they needed.
Yeah.
And they have Super Bowl wins.
Yes.
I was
What is
just
it,
gonna
3
say
in the
that.
last
Wins,
5 years
yeah,
or whatever?
wins.
Yeah.
Plural, not singular, and not 85.
And yeah, I just turned 40, and they won their last Super Bowl before I was 2 years old.
Right.
So
Yes.
If you're just tuning in, this is Reset. I'm Sasha-Ann Simons. We're going behind the headlines in the weekly news recap with the Chicago Tribune's Dan Petrella, NBC5's Christian Farr, and Mitch Armentrout of the Sun-Times. All right, switching gears, Northwestern. The school joined other universities across the country making headlines this week. Students set up a pro-Palestinian encampment. Fill us in, Christian. I know you literally just came from there.
Yeah, I just came from there and just talked to some of the students who are still in this encampment. We thought it was going to be taken down last night. We thought police were going to come in. That did not happen. They said they woke up this morning. No police were there. The encampment has grown since it was put up yesterday morning at about 7 o'clock. In the beginning, when they tried to set that encampment up, they were blocked by police, but then they set up their own human chain and were able to put it up.
And remind us what they're calling for here.
So what they want is for Northwestern and like so many other universities to divest from Israel, calling what's going on there right now with the war between Israel and Hamas, genocide for what's happening to the people in Gaza, the innocent, the civilians. But on the other side of this, Jewish leaders look at this as being anti-Semitic. And in some cases, these encampments have become violent. There have been issues. Yesterday, somebody had a flag. It was a combination Israeli-American flag. And one of the protesters ran up there, took the flag, broke it in half. And there was a lot of cheering that was going on. So there's two sides to this. And there are a lot of Jewish students who are very concerned being on any of these college campuses, not just Northwestern, about their own safety when they're walking around with a yarmulke or any other garb that reflects their Jewish heritage. Sometimes they're accosted, and so they feel very concerned about their safety. But on the other side of this, pro-Palestinian students say the same thing. They were accosted as well. So it's this back and forth that doesn't look like it's going to have an end anytime soon. But the students have met with administration. These are all points that they have brought up before. This has been going on for months. They said the administration heard them but didn't give them any definitive answer about what they're going to do.
Yeah, University President Michael Schill sent a letter to students on Thursday, basically saying the university added an interim addendum, sort of changing student code of conduct and banning tents, etc.
Right, but they still have not done anything yet, and there's a bunch more tents than there were yesterday. So, at Columbia, they took that whole entire thing down, and they arrested people as well because the Jewish students or Jewish leaders are saying that there's a Hamas presence, a Hamas support presence in these encampments, and that's what upsets them. Well, the encampments say we have, for instance, in Northwestern, they say a third of the students involved in this protest are Jewish. So they also want to make their voices heard as well. So I don't know what's going to happen. The University of Chicago is having something this afternoon. Some downtown universities are going to be marching, I think, at 1:30 in support of what's going on with these encampments. But we're just going to have to wait and see what happens with Northwestern if the police decide to go in there maybe tonight and take them out. But at this point, they're not done.
Yeah, you mentioned the violence there, right? I want to go back to that for a second because, we've seen campuses from New York to California, Texas to Minnesota, all have called police in to break up the demonstration and to arrest the students. Many instances of violence happening here, but I'm curious why you think universities, why the administrators opt for police rather than just engaging with protesters on what they're demanding.
Well, they have engaged with them, and I think that this is, for the protesters from their point of view, this is our last resort. and there's probably more resorts after this, but this is the one we're using right now, and this is a collective that's going on. So it's not just exclusive to Northwestern. People are following this, and they're all the same points. They're not bringing up anything different than they haven't brought up months ago, before even what happened in October. And so they just want the university now to take action. They want them to say, hey, change this or we're going to continue to be here for as long as it takes. And they said it could be up to a month. We just don't know.
Yeah,
they're
this
still
is definitely one of those wait and see instances for sure. We recently saw that we had protesters blocking the highway entrance to O'Hare last week. Now, new legislation is currently trying to prevent that. What's Republican State Representative Dan Ugosti of West Suburban St. Charles proposing, Dan?
He would like to make it a felony for protesters to block a roadway while protesting. I will say this is a bill that's coming, fairly
major roadways.
Yeah, major roadways.
Okay.
Yes, yeah, entrances, things like that. Bill that's coming late in the legislative session from a Republican in the superminority in the legislature. So its chances of becoming law are probably about as good as the Bears getting their deal done in Springfield before the end of the session.
You found a way to work the Bears
I did.
back, even though I moved on.
Sorry.
Thanks, Dan.
Have we moved on?
We
have.
I think both what's going on at Northwestern and this proposal in Springfield raise a big question also about what's going to happen this summer when the Democratic National Convention comes to town. I think we're going to see more and more protests and more protesters trying to protest in a way that is disruptive and gets attention and makes it hard for the people they are protesting to go about their business and go about their daily lives and ignore, sort of the messages that they're trying to send.
Yeah. Now, as we get ready to take another quick break, I do want to send our condolences to the family and friends of slain Chicago police officer Luis Huesca. He was killed during a carjacking. He was returning from a shift to his Gage Park home just before 3 a.m. on Sunday. CPD has ruled that his death was in the line of duty. His funeral will be on Monday morning. There's another criminal justice story making headlines this week, Dan. After waiting a year, I should say, for her nomination to be approved as Chicago's first female U.S. attorney, President Biden instead nominated April Perry to be a federal judge. Why?
Well, basically because one United States Senator, J.D. Vance from Ohio, has decided to hold up all of President Biden's U.S. attorney appointments over what he says is the Justice Department's political persecution of Donald Trump and his supporters, and is just not letting any appointments to U.S. attorneys' offices around the country go through. In the meantime, Illinois has been without a permanent U.S. attorney for over a year now since John Lausch stepped down, and we have high-profile cases going on. The Ed Burke trial just wrapped up earlier this year, coming up this fall. Former House Speaker Michael Madigan is supposed to go on trial, and obviously there are competent, capable attorneys in the U.S. Attorney's Office handling those cases. But there's not a permanent, appointed, approved leader in that office that has done so much over the last couple decades, at least, to root out public corruption in Illinois, to take on serious other federal crimes that happen here in Chicago. She's going to get this federal judgeship, and it really. U.S. Senator Dick Durbin, who chairs the Senate Judiciary Committee, has expressed extreme frustration with the way this process is working, and just the Senate sort of grinding to a halt on some of these things, some of these basic duties that they're supposed to do, giving advice and consent to appointments of the president, and these U.S. attorney appointments and judge appointment things are usually things where there's a lot of discretion given to the senators from that particular state and who is selected and are moved through fairly quickly unless there's some serious concerns or issues. So the fact that one person can hold this all up over their political point of view is pretty baffling.
Yeah. Turning now to a very different legal story. Some Chicago consumers are upset over the closing of specialty grocers Foxtrot and Dom's Kitchen and Market. Now the companies are facing a class action lawsuit for not notifying the employees before they abruptly closed the stores earlier this week. So, of course, we're going to be watching what happens with that lawsuit. But let's go back. Were any of you three upset or surprised about the news? Did you see what broke out on social media?
I'm still upset about Dominic's leaving. I'm still upset about that.
Come to 2024.
Yeah, I know. No, I saw the headline. It seemed pretty disappointing. I mean, that they started, employees went to work that morning.
Yeah.
People went in, purchased things, and then all of a sudden, it was around 11:30, they all shut down. And all these employees are outside and they're thinking, what the heck's going on? People are coming back to maybe pick up lunch or something else. And they're like,
I mean, the way it was handled for the workers, especially, it was just terrible.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's an Illinois law that says if I forget what the exact numbers are, but if you're laying off a certain number of employees, you're supposed to give advance notice to the state of Illinois of mass layoffs. And it appears, at least in this instance, that was not done. And so,
yeah, well, that's why I'm keeping close eyes on this lawsuit, because I really want to see what happens here. Let's turn to you now, Christian, a story that you covered, very different here. This one's going to impact some of our Indiana listeners. Tell us what's happening in Hammond.
So in Hammond, Indiana, I believe it was 2 days ago, all of a sudden the schools were shut down. Of course, there was no snow. It wasn't weather related, anything like that. What happened was about 40% of the teaching staff called off. This had been in the works for a little while because they say that Hammond School District is mismanaged. They've mismanaged funds for decades. They've gotten a lot of money over the years, millions of dollars from the pandemic, and they say all those funds have been mismanaged, and they were losing a lot of paraprofessionals. And a large number, I don't know if it's 30% or 35% of the students in Hammond are their first language is Spanish. And so they had a lot of ELL, English language teachers or support staff, and they laid off all of these people except for, I think, 4 to take care of all of these schools.
Are they still protesting?
Well, so they called off that one day, and it came the day after there was a school board meeting where they announced shutting down 3 schools. And some of these schools, the buildings are only 20 years old. I mean, when you take a look at them, they look practically brand new. And so the people in the community were upset, teachers were upset, and so that led to all of these schools having to be shut down. Now, school was back in session yesterday, but what does the future look like? There's not a whole lot of confidence in the superintendent, at least by a lot of people in the community and by teachers as well, and they think that they need to do something differently. Or there was a referendum that everybody passed on. They voted it down that was going to be used to fund these public schools. And so there's this fear that there could be a state takeover, which is exactly what happened in Gary. Gary looking to close down some schools because they've got empty school buildings because they have a dwindling population that's going on there. So you're just wondering, what does the future of Hammond schools look like?
My goodness. Well, let's touch on another story, Mitch, and this is no joke. The satirical publication The Onion has been sold to a new Chicago company. What's going on?
So, yeah, this was announced yesterday that The Onion has been purchased by a company called Global Tetrahedron Network, I believe, which is a reference to an old Onion article. It's just sort of like a kind of a joke about, sort of a stereotypical mega conglomeration company name. We don't actually know who's behind the company yet. G&O, which is the company that previously owned The Onion, says that it's some local folks from the comedy scene who are invested in keeping
it going.
Our beloved satirical newspaper alive. I know The Onion's union, their unionized staff are full-throated support of this new ownership.
Yeah.
So it sounds like good news to me.
Yeah, they've agreed to keep the entire staff intact and here in Chicago. So, yeah. We've got another media story to tackle. David Pecker, who's the former publisher of the National Enquirer, has been testifying in Donald Trump's criminal trial about something tabloids are calling catch and kill. Pecker's been testifying about paying for stories that would have harmed the former president and then not running them. So yesterday he testified that he paid $20,000 for a story involving former Obama White House Chief of Staff Rahm Emanuel when he was in the lead up to his Chicago mayoral campaign. Now, people are already pretty skeptical of the media. We know this, right? So I'm curious if y'all have any thoughts about how something like this tabloid testimony just further erodes the trust that people have in us.
Yeah,
do you think they're at home questioning our ethics now and wondering, about how we operate our style of media?
I think a certain segment of the population has, but Is it truthful? I don't know. I mean,
I cringe when people, even in my family, are like, "Oh, the media this," and I'm
you
like,
know,
"Oh, but not me."
the whole fake news, thing. I mean, I don't know how many times on a live shot you'd hear, fake news over and over again. And,
Yeah.
I've spent my career double checking sources, and following a certain path. And so I feel like I do the best job possible.
Yeah.
Does it happen every single day? No. You do, we're human beings. We do make mistakes, but for the most part, I think,
Yeah.
a large portion of my fellow journalists here do the best job possible with the resources we have.
Do you think most people understand that, like, none of us would be paying a source for an interview? Like, that's just not how it works in journalism?
I certainly hope so. I mean, and it shouldn't be how it works in journalism. I hope that folks are smart enough to distinguish the National Enquirer from, the Chicago Tribune or NBC5 or even a tabloid like the Chicago Sun-Times.
Or WBEZ.org.
Yes. Yeah, and I mean, the whole story is just very fascinating. It also involves Rahm Emanuel's brother, Ari Emanuel, who's a Hollywood agent and supposedly doing this for other Hollywood clients as well. Obviously not a story that I'm sure Rahm is happy to see out there in court testimony. He just had a big gala state dinner at the White House in his new job as the ambassador to Japan that I understand went very well. So, we don't know much more detail than what was on the stand yesterday, but a surprising revelation, I guess, is how I would put it.
I would put it the same way. Shifting gears, I want to talk about what's going on outside. It's beautiful. This weekend is going to be even more beautiful. Temperatures are going up to the 80s. Did anybody know that?
I did after I woke up this morning. Can't say I knew it last night.
Well, besides shorts and sandals finally coming out again, this warmer weather is also going to mean billions and billions of cicadas. They're coming out.
Looking forward to that.
When are we going to start noticing them, Christian?
You're
on cicada watch.
I am on cicada watch, yeah. It looks like the end of May. We should see them. Some started to emerge. They didn't really emerge in DuPage County, but I guess what they do is they build tunnels so that it makes it easier for them when they emerge. So we saw one while we were out there. It was very tiny, but
oh my goodness.
and I guess when they show up, I have not been in this. It looks like the birds, like they're, flying in your face. And so it's going to be very interesting.
I'm not looking forward to it at all.
Yeah, neither am I.
Not
I'm
at
good.
all. A lot of people are going to be heading outside, as we know, to enjoy that warm weather. You recently covered a story, Mitch. This was about a possible name change for one of the area's most popular outdoor destinations.
Right, Starved Rock State Park. It's about, an hour and a half or so west near Ottawa, Illinois. It's a great spot if you've never been. Beautiful hiking, views of the Illinois River. But there's some talk of a potential name change for the park because of its name, which is based on a Potawatomi legend about basically a battle between two warring tribal factions that ended with one being sort of marooned on top of this big land formation. It's like 125 feet up, and essentially they were starved upon the rock.
So this is all just discussions for now. There are no actual plans, so we're clear
it's going to be
at the moment to change the name.
A long road of discussions, which is what the Illinois Department of Resources says. It would actually require a law change in Springfield to change the name. So we're several steps removed, but there are some groups who would like to, a name that's more tied to just its natural beauty as opposed to a pretty brutal legend.
Well, we'll leave it there. That's it for the week. My thanks to Mitch Armentrout of the Chicago Sun-Times, Chicago Tribune's Dan Petrella, and NBC5 Chicago's Christian Farr. Have a great weekend, gentlemen.
You too.
Thanks.